and we are going to talk about the future of blockchain, well, with games. But of course, I just want to highlight, just think about how much stuff we've gone through in this afternoon. There's huge amounts of conversations about what developers want, about fundraising, about NFTs. It's an incredibly rich and dense topic. And I think we've had some amazing people, and it's been thanks to having Tron and Cocos that we've been able to do this. Right, so let's sort of kick off. And should we start with, do you want to introduce yourself and say what you do?
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Daniel Tao, the last one. From Blockfish, we are a blockchain gaming platform, and we are actually the team behind one of the EOS and the Tron's most toppest, dApps. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Alex Amsel. I'm actually independent in that I work for a number of different companies, just do consultancy, and I like doing research in this space. I've been talking about blockchain and games for several years and what we can do. And I just want to say, for anyone who's interested, we've just opened up something called the Blockchain Game Alliance, which you can find at blockchaingamealliance.org. It's completely free to join. It's basically an organization that's going to be looking at some of the problems we find, some of the lack of standards, and trying to get people to work together to solve these problems and to establish standards. It's completely independent of any one blockchain, so it doesn't matter if you're Tron or EOS or Ethereum or Loom, and we'd love to have you to join. So that's the blockchaingamealliance.org.
Hey, I'm Vincent New from Dapp.Review. Dapp.Review is a research institute focused on decentralized application. So we have covered 7 public chains, and we track data and analytics of over 2,700 dApps. And we also write lots of data reports, market insight, and some reviews of new dApps.
My name is Devin Finzer. I'm one of the co-founders of OpenSea, which is a marketplace for digital assets, primarily gaming items, on Ethereum.
So let's start. I think when you're going to look at the future, you're going to think about what's possible. We should start with working at where we are. So, Daniel, do you want to how would you sum up where you think we are in terms of the evolution of the merger between games and blockchain?
Sure. I think it's definitely the dawn of the new era of the gaming industry, because I don't know anyone of you still remember when is the first game ever visual computer game in the history, the Pong, right? It was 40 years ago, almost 50, 70, 72, 73, right? So, but it was going to be a decades after it being launched, and then people start really understand what is video games looks like, and people start to adopt this new technology and start playing it. So as one of the early dApp developers, we starting to build the games. Well, we are actually Cocos users, and we was on that picture. And we know the technology is still, we have a lot of challenge, but I'm pretty sure this is just going to be a start. Yeah.
So, I find that interesting because, Alex, I'd love to know your opinion, because I think this is a bit, for me, it's not like the dawn, because we've got lots of heritage and history in the different areas, although maybe arguably not in blockchain. But I do feel like it's a bit like the Java days, for those of you who are old enough to remember them. But what I mean by that is there's a lot of denial of the possibility, fundamentally. Is that a fair assessment?
I'm not sure that's quite the right comparison.
Okay.
Back in the day, in the days of early mobile, before Apple decided to actually make things sensible, we had to write in Java, and it was a nightmare, and everything about the ecosystem was horrendous. But the fact was, we were still writing traditional games on small devices that people paid a fixed amount of money for.
Although they did have very handsome games managers.
One or two, maybe. Whereas I think in the blockchain games world, yes, there's a lot of technological infrastructure that's got to be worked on. There's a lot of quite serious economic problems that we've got to resolve, or at least got to see if we can establish standards for. But I think fundamentally, no one really quite knows how best to use blockchains yet in games. There's lots of interesting experiments. I think NFTs are absolutely going to be massively successful in different ways, but we're not even scratching the surface of those yet. So I think we're in that exploratory phase. And I think there's a lot more of that to go. And hopefully one of these projects will just actually go mainstream, and by mainstream I mean people who have nothing to do with blockchain are just playing it in their hundreds of thousands. And I think we're still some way from that.
So it sounds a bit more like the Cambrian explosion we're kind of heading toward. Is that fair? I mean, is that a better description? I mean,
yeah, I think we really are still in that nurturing. Like we're now maybe we're multicellular organisms, but we've not quite got. We're still quite working out what that really means. So we have got a way to go.
So Vincent, this picture of the Darwinian evolution of blockchain, is this familiar to you, or do you see it differently? But I was thinking Vincent, sorry.
I can speak some in the data perspective. So from our data, we can see there is like more than 1,500 dApps, and mostly our dApps are over like 60 to 30% are games. And there is like $5 billion transaction volume in last year. And this year, there's only like 2 months and a half. There's already like $2.8 billion. So that's, but I have to say there's a large portion of those crazy numbers are from gambling games. But it shows that there are people are exploring the possibilities, and also there are users to are embracing it and trying to play those games. And also we have been seeing there's more and more professional game developers and joining the party. So I think it's still in the very early stage of the market, and everyone is trying to find what is the right fit for blockchain to integrate it in the game.
Yeah. So is it don't know, is it a design question? Is it a technology? I think it's for Devon. Are you thinking this state of play that we're talking about, this early stages, are we what's going to take to break us forward? Is it new change?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with sort of the previous statements that we're in an experimental phase. The one thing I would add is I think we've seen some degree of product market fit, but just with a very small number of users. So I think like Axie Infinity is a great example where they have a super engaged community, but there's only thousands of people in that community. So I think there's just a lot of unlocks that have to happen. Just a lot of like really simple stuff like user onboarding, easier to acquire crypto, that type of stuff. And then definitely some iterations on like fundamentals and business models of blockchain games. But I think that there are ones that are working. It's just there's no ones that have like penetrated a mainstream user yet.
So let's explore that a little bit further. So I mean, what do you think? I mean, is it just that we've got a poor user experience, we just have to educate people or have to streamline the process? Or is it something more fundamental? I mean, is even talking about blockchain a sensible thing to do? Or is it just something that should be hidden away in the back end?
I mean, to these early adopters who love the technology, I think it makes a lot of sense, and sometimes it can be valuable marketing. But ultimately, I think there's going to have to be a couple cycles of games that work with a new model where players can buy into these items and make money in the game and actually have ownership in the game. And there's only just a few examples of that, and there's a bunch on the horizon. So I think just we need more examples for people to point to, and then for developers to reference as well.
I mean, for me, it feels a bit like location games. My first design I was working on was 2002 with the original team, Bot Fighters, who did the Helsinki SMS-based thing. The reason I mention that is because if you think about 2002 to 2016, when Pokemon Go comes out, that's when it becomes huge. And I feel like there's a parallel here, which is like lots of people were dabbling with that technology. I feel like we're here, lots of people dabbling. Does it take a brand? Does it take something which is bringing an existing understood premise to really make it scale? I'd like to see what you think, Daniel.
Sure. I think every new technology have to go through what we call the crossing the chasm, right?
Jeffrey Moore, fantastic book.
Yeah. So I think there are 5 types of people, consumers. One is the innovators, one is early adopter, early majority, late majority, and the laggards. So I think most of the people, so like we're talking about, like the innovators, they like the technology. Like I remember the first time I installed MetaMask and started playing crypto games, I was like, oh, it's cool, right? I guess a lot of people sitting here are developers. The first time you wrote a game, like a Pong game, and it's fun. It's crazily fun, right? But But to those majorities, they don't like that. They don't want to spending like half hours installing Chrome extension and buy cryptos, right? So every different kind of type of audience, we have to use different kind of strategy to attract them. So. Like we said, we only have a very limited amount of DAUs these days. Couple tens, hundreds, maybe DAUs in the maximum. But how we achieve those billings, gamers, those majorities, that's the biggest challenge for us, I think. So, yeah.
Cool. Alex, what do you think?
I think it's going to take a couple of different things. First thing is that like the vast majority of users are not going to be using MetaMask or anything like MetaMask. I mean, it may well be they end up using something that's a bit akin to Steam, but for more of their items and inventory. But I think it will go beyond game NFTs. I think it'll be much more generalized. But really, we've got to experiment with what actually gets gamers addicted to those games or those NFTs. I mean, they don't necessarily need to be the same thing. And I've been having a lot of conversations recently about ownership again, which I've always been really fascinated by, and why we'd even bother having ownership on the blockchain. Because people talk about ownership like it's like a benefit to users, but it's not. At least a user doesn't think it is. They don't really understand what that means because they already think they own their stuff. What we have to do is go, well, if you've got this character from Axie Infinity or whatever, or this card from Crypto Zombies, actually there's something else you can do with it that's really interesting. Well, if you combine these three things together, there's something else you can do where you get these benefits. We've got to find some way that really gets users to come back and they want these features in the game. We can't talk about ownership. We actually have to think of it in terms of gameplay and that whole game loop. And that hasn't been solved yet. There's a lot of people doing interesting things, but games take years to, like, good games usually take years to make. This is so early.
Well, hyper-casual games, days, but that's because of a different model, but that's never another subject. Vincent, what do you think?
I actually have some real examples. Like, not all the developers like to installing MetaMask. I mean, last year, I remember it's February last year, and I went to one of my friends who is a really professional game developer. He had like 10 years game dev experience, and he knew nothing about blockchains, and he just heard about the concept, and he asked me to tell him what is blockchain and all the details. So I told them about like the true ownership kind of stuff and some all kinds of features we know, and then he's really excited about that. And I say, but now the infrastructure is not doesn't have really good user experience, and the user base is low. And he's asking why the user base is low. I said that, okay, now you can try to buy crypto kitties. And then he spent like 2 hours, he is a developer, and he spent 2 hours to understand how to install MetaMask and what is private key, and then buy some Ethers from OTC, and then transfer the token to his MetaMask address, and then successfully I bought a kitty. So it's really frustrating for him. And then he said, okay, I don't think for now we want to have any experimental trial on the blockchain games. So I think the user entry barrier is definitely the obstacle for blockchains to get into massive adoption, because for the mainstream gamers, they just use email or mobile phone number and a password and to get an account and play the game. It's just that simple. But for blockchain users, you need to remember all those, very complicated stuff. So yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, totally.
Can I just add that, this is completely true. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying it's not the barrier. It's a barrier that has to be got around, and projects like Plasma Bears are really cool because I think I saw Ben tweet earlier that you'd probably be able to confirm this, 300,000 Plasma Bear NFTs or related NFTs issued on their sidechain, and about 600 moved to Ethereum. And when it's on the sidechain, literally people sign up with their email address and a password, and it's a website, and they can just use stuff. There's no crypto anywhere evident unless you really want it. So it is absolutely a barrier, but it's quite easy to get over that barrier if you're not worried so much about owning all your stuff, but you still got to do all the rest of it. You still got to make sure that there's an advantage to it being on a blockchain in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think what's interesting about the space right now is if you go blockchain native, there's this terrible hurdle. Everyone knows about it. But then the light at the end of the tunnel is actually kind of interesting right now because there was a guy who's like streaming blockchain games, like one of the only blockchain game streamers, and he was like playing all these games, and then he would go to OpenSea where you can see all of your stuff across every single game, and he was like, oh, here's all my stuff that I own and that I can like sell at any point in time, right? And that's like it's a very early instance of that, but I think that is like the idea of ownership actually mattering to a user, and I think liquidity is really what leads to people valuing their assets. And once there's a few games where people understand that assets are liquid, they're going to treat them differently than they would if it's not going to require them knowing about the blockchain, but it's just going to require them thinking about them differently.
Well, this is a critical thing that we learned when I was doing PlayStation Home. It's like it's something's not valuable unless other people can see it. And so when we had this gold suit with money coming out the pockets, which was the most expensive thing we had on the store, people would deliberately try and go to an instance where only people wearing that outfit would be allowed in so that they could show off to everybody else. And it was that show off part that was utterly critical. Is that fair?
Yeah, we're missing and this will come, like there are enough creative people in this room and in this conference to do this. The experiential aspect is so critical, and especially when you've got true like scarcity, you want to experience it, you want to see that something is a signed item, you want to know where it came from. We need to make that experience really fun and easy to share, and I know people are going to do it, and I know projects like OpenSea are going to make it easier and stuff as well. That's the stuff that people really, really like, and that's the stuff we can really.
But then, ironically, the difficulty of getting the asset might even be an attraction. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't fix UX, but I'm just saying it's not always the way. So, I mean, we haven't got much time, so I'm going to just ask you one sort of question. What's the thing that you look forward to most, and what do you think it's going to take to get there? So, Daniel.
I probably would say, from a developer's perspective, I would like to see more and more blockchain visualize the gaming engine to come up, because we started building dApps like early 2018, and there's no such tools to help you. We tried the Cogos Creator, we tried the Unity, but there's a lot of things we have to learn and to practically to find out the solution, how to interact with the blockchain, or even like right now we have a very special setup as an interact among the server, client, and the blockchain. So there is it's a very huge learning curve for a traditional gaming developers to do that. And I know in the past, before the traditional game engine came up, it's pretty hard to become a game developer. And then the game engine changed the world. So I really hope sometimes there will be blockchain game engine to come up, so this industry will really get into the next level.
Yeah, I'm bitter about all the game engines because I used to write code in assembler, and that was it. Now everyone can do this. That's rubbish. I'm really fascinated by a few things at the moment. I'm particularly fascinated by how we can get communities more involved around games and more interactions, and even the idea of guilds running as DAOs. That's something I'm exploring at the moment. I really want to see a lot more sort of interoperability between games, but not in the way that people think. I've been talking to certain people about it here, and I'm desperate to persuade them to do something where we get common things from different games and make them into another game of some kind, and show that people can do that as their own form of UGC with smart contracts, because that genuinely only can be done on blockchains. And so that's what I want to see, is more real creativity in that side of things. But we need the baseline first.
Yeah, just a quick add-on. I want to say the engine thing is because it's purely like business oriented. You have to be more efficient. So I'm proud of coding, but end of the word, you have to make profit and be efficient, right?
Okay. I look forward to seeing more real games, real blockchain games with complex gameplays and creative mechanic. because at end of the day, what users or players really want is just a great game that is fun to play. It's not no matter players don't care about the technology, whether you use blockchain or not. We just want some really fun game to play. So that's I think in something like Meso games or like Ghost Unchained, we have been seeing lots of game developers exploring. So I think maybe in the second half of this year, we'll see more and more these kind of games come out.
Yeah, Alex kind of stole mine, but I'm super excited about this idea of layer 2 and like bootstrapping. So I think there's many different examples of this. It's not just like inter-game interoperability, but one example of bootstrapping is, for example, launching your game without a marketplace, right? And just using OpenSea as a marketplace. I think that's awesome. But then another example of bootstrapping is Kitty Race and Kitty Hats. They both took the existing CryptoKitties community and bootstrapped off of that kind of small community. They weren't able to monetize as effectively as a real game, but it was a really cool thing. So I'd love to see a project that just completely bootstraps. They take assets from other games and then they build this gaming experience on top of it, and they appeal to each of those existing gaming communities and use that as their kind of distribution mechanism. I think that'd be pretty cool.
You're in this room and you know what you need to do, and I'm not saying anything else.
I think what I'm picking from this is that we're in this. Dawn is one answer, the kind of evolutionary is another part of it, but essentially we don't know yet what this possibility can be, but we have the opportunity to nurture the seed and to actually imagine new things and to take the right tools and the right experiences, and at the end of the day work out how we help players experience games in ways no one's thought of yet. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to players feeling that what we're producing for them is amazing. If it's not, we might as well go home. So let's not do that. Let's pick the right tools. Let's make the right games. And I'd like to thank the panel for talking with me.